We're off. Branding, Norwich's secret sauce. We have a hashtag for this webinar, which is simply Brand Norwich. So if you are tweeting or Instagramming or whatever, I hope some of you are, I'll try to do that as well a bit as we go on. That's the hashtag to use, Brand Norwich. And the plan for this webinar is a short welcome from me, and then a discussion with our fantastic panel before we open things up to everybody at 12:45, and then I'm going to try and sum up if I can at about 1:15, and I promise we'll finish in time for lunch for 1:30. So we're going to start with, if we can, with a poll. So here it comes. How is your business doing at the moment? You should be able to vote there on the screen, and we'll get a bit of a picture of what it looks like at the moment. And Jessica, who I think is driving this, when we've got lots of votes in, we'll show the results. Just get a bit of a snapshot for the temperature of the businesses in the room at the moment. Oh, okay. So, all right. Well, this is encouraging in a way. We have a full number who are. We have roughly even between static and growing. So this is not as a bleaker picture as it could be. This is moderately encouraging, and I'm hoping that we can learn from those who are at least static and even better growing at the moment, some of the secrets of success. Thank you very much for voting. So that sets the scene. My name is Robert Jones. I'm an independent brand consultant based in London. I've worked for more than 25 years at a brand agency here called Wolff Olins, and I still do projects with Wolff Olins. But I also work 2 days a week at the University of East Anglia, where we run a postgraduate course called Brand Leadership, which has been going for 10 years now, but it's still unique. It's the only master's course in brand leadership. And along the way, I've written a couple of books. The Big Idea, you can see there, and more recently, a book called Branding, A Very Short Introduction, which is exactly what it says in the title. That's a little bit about me. Here are some of the clients I've worked with over the years, including actually Aviva. And UEA, so kind of big range of clients, and one of the things that we often need to explain to clients, and I'm sure not to you, is that brand is not just a name or a logo or a slogan or even the product. It's much more than any of these. It's a more exciting thing than any of these, and I think in simple terms, brand is what you stand for in people's minds out in the world. It's the ideas, the thoughts, the feelings, the associations, the memories, all of those things that they have about you. Like IKEA stands for a really clear idea about design for everybody. Amazon about everything on demand. TikTok, more recently, I would say, is about people's weird creativity. But all of these great businesses stand for something. And if you stand for something, then that helps you to keep customers because they know what you're all about, to attract talent, which is often harder actually than attracting customers, to excite investors, to keep the regulators happy, and to open up innovation, because if you stand for people's weird creativity, then there's no end of things that you could do beyond the original product. And in that sense, and I think this is important, is your brand is your future. a brand is a strong brand out there in people's hearts and minds is the best possible guarantee for a future for the organization. So any business has a choice. Do we spend on marketing and get short-term gains, or do we also invest in brand and get long-term gains? And I'm guessing all of us in this room, because we've come along to this session, do believe in that long-term investment. But there are plenty of businesses that don't, and that don't therefore secure their future in the way that they could. So investing in branding, long-term, all about future. But at the moment, our thoughts are more short-term. Times are tough, and so I think was reflected in our poll. There's a range of different things going on. There are companies, organisations, brands that are probably slowly dying. I heard about Cineworld just in the news yesterday. There's a whole load of them that are just about surviving, and some, like Bill's, the casual dining chain, has made, I think, the actually very wise move of doing a rebrand while reopening. So it's reopening as the same thing, but also kind of different and interesting and exciting. And then there are brands that are thriving, and we know that Co-op has had an extremely good few months because its strategy has always been to have local, small stores, and that's where people have been wanting to shop. Their strategy has fitted the needs of the times, and they also did a lot of really good work a couple of years ago on their brand and visual identity. So there's kind of range of things going on, but all of us are uncertain. I think even those who are thriving and growing can't really see that for sure going many months into the future. The future is just very uncertain. Will there be another spike? Will there be a vaccine? Who knows? There will be a vaccine eventually, but who knows when? So when everything is uncertain, it really helps, I think, to stand for something. And that's why I think all of this matters so much right now. And not just to stand for something, but to invent the future we want, rather than to be controlled by what's going on around us. This Indian novelist, Arundhati Roy, wrote a really fantastic piece in the Financial Times right back at the start of the crisis, where she said, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with a little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. These are strong words, but I think there's something, there's a challenge there for those of us who work in branding about what is the future that we want to build through our brands. And the crisis, I think, has been a huge accelerator of existing long-term trends, and you'll be aware of lots of them in your own business. I'm aware of a couple of really big long-term trends, one towards what you might call blended living, in other words, doing things both online and offline. And those of us who are involved in education know that currently very vividly, where we're doing our best to provide live teaching online, but also some really good quality face-to-face teaching. And it's that mix of the two that I think is the future. And then conscious consumption, meaning consumers much more conscious of the impact they do on the world, much higher expectations of the ethics of the companies that they buy from. And actually, even the word consumption may be question mark around that, because one of the things we're all going to have to do as a planet in the next 10 years is simply to consume less somehow. So, so my clients are currently investing in brand to rekindle growth. So I can't really name clients for confidentiality reasons, but I'm working with one organisation that's building a new brand actually to get customers back into what they do, but also to reach new people who've never even thought about what they do. I've got another client in Scandinavia, actually, that's using brand and the idea of purpose in the organisation to fuel its people's self-belief. Because if they've got 20,000 people, and if they all really believe in themselves, have a real confidence in the organisation, then they'll be able to achieve miracles. And then finally, investing in brand to invent new ways to grow. We did some work just before the lockdown with a publisher, which was just in time because it enabled that publisher to invent lots of new products and services that it could deliver purely online. And that's now an exciting source of growth for the business. So that's just a little bit of a picture of what I think is going on. Just finally, I think it's amazing what we have here in Norwich. And as someone who's a kind of half resident in Norwich, I see this really clearly, that we've got famous heritage brands. We've got really exciting, in some ways, contemporary brands, Lotus becoming extremely contemporary now with its electric cars. We've got newer, younger brands that are growing rapidly and building a national reputation and following. And we've got one of the most famous financial services brands in the world, in Aviva. This is all in one city. And every city will have some famous brands, but not many have got this many. And not only have we got all of this, we've also got brilliant agencies. Fountain is one of them here, and I can see in the room we've got a lot more agencies represented. And we've got highly creative students both at NUA and at UEA. Pretty unusual combination. Plus we have a thing called the History of Advertising Trust, which we will come back to in a moment. So my question is, how can we use the power of branding to rekindle growth in and around Norwich, maybe supporting each other, beating the magnetism that London used to have for talent and for budget, which I think London has honestly lost. And it'll get some of it back, but there's an opportunity at the moment, and rekindle growth, and maybe to think about a cluster of organisations that find ways to work together to create a kind of critical mass around brands and branding. And that's kind of my vision, really, for what I would love to see happen. But now over to our panel, and let me introduce Claire, Vincent from Aviva, who I've mentioned, with a huge brand to look after, and a global story to tell. Simon Middleton from Booja-Booja, fairly new as Chief Marketing Officer in this fantastic chocolate company. Rebecca Lewis-Smith, one of the founders of an award-winning digital agency, Fountain Partnership, and she'll tell us more about that. And then Richard Powell, who runs the History of Advertising Trust, which I would say is probably the world's greatest branding archive, actually, just down the road. So that's our panel, and thank you very much, all four of you, for joining. And I'm going to start the conversation with you, and then we'll bring everyone in, but do keep chatting on the chat as we go through, and we'll try and pick up points that you raise later. So maybe Rebecca, if I can start with you, just to hear a little bit about tell us a bit about your business and how it's doing in the current crisis. Perhaps it's not a crisis for you.
It certainly was a crisis to start off with. We did not have an easy beginning of lockdown. One of the interesting things that we noticed was all of our clients suddenly asking to pause contracts, which is an interesting concept because not many contracts have a pause button in our experience, but we could completely understand where clients were coming from, and we had to navigate that very careful line of keeping the relationship with the client strong so that we could support them to come back. So not sort of annoy them by saying, no, it's going to be strict to our terms of this contract, but also not put ourselves in a really tricky position. I mean, I'm guessing many of the people here today are in service businesses, and when people stop paying you bills, you have a hard time paying salaries. So we balanced our way through that, and I think April and May were tough, but by June things were starting to look better. And where we are now is that we are back to where we were before this crisis, and projecting over the next couple of months to get beyond that as well. And I think we're in a very good space at the moment that we have very, very strong relationships with our clients. Most of our new business comes from client referral or from partnerships where we're working with other agencies and they bring us in. And where Fountain sits on your, you were describing the sort of brand or spending on marketing, we're very much in that spend on marketing space. We are paid search, SEO, we focus a lot on conversion rate optimization, so making sure that people who land on websites actually take action, so become a customer, and then from there, not just a one-off customer, but a long-term customer. Like, so we focus on lifetime value a lot. But within that, we obviously we have to work with the brands that our clients have, and we know the power of a sort of, I was going to say an authentic brand. We know how much it means to work with a client where their brand isn't just a logo or a strap phrase, but actually is how they work and what they offer is sort of really embedded into that. So while we sit at that end of the spend on marketing, get money today line of things, we know how important that long-term view is, and we also are very, very passionate about our own brand being that sort of representation of who we are and why we are and how we do what we do.
And you're sounding optimistic about 2021 as well.
Cautiously so, cautiously optimistic. I think what we're aware of is that as we go into this second wave and we see how, you know, what the government ends up doing, how people end up behaving, all of those different things, what we're aware of is that it's less unknown than it was in March. I think in March our clients panicked, and we had clients who said to us, we definitely won't be back online until at least September and October, and actually they were coming back in June. And that sort of end of March, early April panic, which, you know, we experienced ourselves as well, that sense of, oh my God, like how fast is this, or when is this downward slope going to stop? And for Fountain, we were really lucky. It went down a bit and then it flattened out and now it's gone back up. We had a pretty clear V, which we're hoping is turning into that tick. Right. But what we recognise is that even if things get really bad again, even if the government announces lockdown, our clients will behave differently from last time. They won't be panicking and pausing everything. And I think that in a way we're very lucky in that we help people to sell online, and any business that wants to get through this is likely to have to look at how they sell online.
Yeah. Simon, I'm guessing that a crisis calls for chocolate as well, actually, and that you've probably done reasonably well in the last few months.
Yeah, we have done extraordinarily well, actually. It's not just the crisis, actually. Yes, it's true. Ice cream consumption was very, very high this summer, partly because we had great weather, partly because people weren't able to do other things. So I think there was a lot of sort of home indulgence. It's also applied to chocolate. We make ice cream and chocolate, but I think that going back to your earlier comment about conscious consumption, I think, and we'll probably come on to this later, and you were talking about brands standing for something. The really exciting thing for me as a newbie at Booja-Booja is it very clearly, explicitly, overtly stands for something which is vegan, delicious indulgence, if you like. And before, the reason I got involved, the company's not actually new at all. It's been going since 1999, but it was much less overt. It's always been vegan and it's always been organic, but it wasn't really talking about, it didn't use the word vegan for a very long time. It talked about dairy-free and so on. But we're at the happy place where veganism as a lifestyle choice, for a whole variety of reasons, some of which you might refer to as conscious consumption, has become mainstream. So having been a sort of slow burner, if you like, and a brand that's appealed to a niche group of people, relatively speaking, we're now appealing to the audience has just massively grown because there are so many more vegans, there are so many more vegan curious people, there are so many more people experimenting with dairy-free products, with all kinds of sort of free-from things, cruelty-free, whatever. And all of that happily has happened for us. And then we are very sort of happily for the business, the COVID crisis, which affected so many people, particularly as you talked about in service and so on, didn't impact negatively on us. In fact, I think we probably saw a bump because of it. But I think we're growing year on year and had been anyway. Yeah, I don't. We're one of those things that I think will be part of the future, as long as we stick to our principles about what we stand for.
Yeah, yeah, great. Claire, a very different kind of business, obviously much bigger global business. How has the crisis been for Aviva?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So I guess the good thing about being such a big business and covering a broad range of insurance is that we can often balance. So where one area might struggle a little bit, the other can thrive. Not sure we've been thriving across everywhere, but I guess the nature of insurance is that as a company, we make sure we have sufficient cash flow to sort of weather crises, whether that be obviously the storms that we had in January, and then something like this, although I'm not sure if anyone ever could have predicted this. But so I think as far as Aviva is concerned, we were always very comfortable knowing that we had a very good cash surplus. I think I was really surprised. So I don't know how many of you know, but the Horizon Business Centre up at Broadham Business Park, which is where the call centre is, I think there are 400 or 500 people working there, and as a company I think we've always been a bit nervous about call centres working from home, and could you trust people to do that? What this did is sped things up. We didn't have a choice, so within a matter of weeks every single person had a laptop, was working from home. So I think the response, I think we surprised ourselves, something that had probably been talked about for years and was going through various risk controls and mitigation and stuff you just had to do, it's brilliant. So yeah, we kind of worked through that fine. Didn't have to furlough anyone at all across the company, so that was really good, but it doesn't mean that everything was positive and we were thriving. So the particular area that I work in is general insurance, so that's your car, home, travel insurance. And I look after customer engagement and retention. To start off with, our retention rates just shot up because I think everyone was kind of more concerned about buying toilet rolls than they were about renewing their car insurance. So they stuck with their provider. You had bigger things to worry about. So actually we retained a lot of customers, which was brilliant for my job, helped me out. But since then we've seen a big change in customer behaviour, which I think is our biggest challenge, and our sort of heartland of older affluent customers who had great trust with our brand, and then came back to us, wanted to come back to us every single year. They're now starting to open up to sort of the digital age, and the aggregators and our competitors are spending more and more and more. Like the spend from the aggregators, the price comparison sites, is just astronomical. They're everywhere, so everyone's kind of going, oh, now I've got a bit more time on my hands, I'm going to shop around, I'm going to try and find the best deal for my insurance. So this is our biggest challenge at the minute. And we are very much, from a brand point of view, spending on marketing rather than investing with our brand. So yeah, I think we're in a sort of a place where we need to step back and review. We need to understand our customers again, because lots of customer behaviour and attitudes have changed, and we need to review our approach. So it's leading to a very interesting, challenging times, but it's at least on our toes.
Great. Well, that's really fascinating, Claire, and interesting. You say how the crisis accelerated things that were going to happen anyway. I think we've all experienced that in so many different ways. Richard, let's bring you in. So, how did the crisis affect the history of advertising trust?
Well, like everybody, last March we were running through work as usual, and then the lockdown hit. We had no idea in some respects which way things were going. We didn't know whether which brands how they would react, which agencies, etc. So luckily we'd broadened our income base. We're an accredited archive, so we have the archives of people like Heinz, Hovis, Butlins, Vimto, and and as from next week, a large biscuit company, but who can remain nameless, but I'm sure you ate loads of them over the summer. And so the brands themselves were fine in some respects. The agencies had a harder time. You know, advertising on television changed enormously. So we didn't know which way it was going to go. But I have to say, we have weathered the storm. As a charity, we've gone through. We've seen actually a really strong increase in interest from the brands who, as you would expect, are looking at their heritage and their long standing to create new advertising campaigns as we go forward. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment on re-inspiring sort of older campaigns. The agencies have been quieter, but because a lot of adverts, if you noticed over the summer, have been recycled. So there's not a huge amount of new ads, but there are some that are working on it. And so the ad agencies section is slightly tentative, but the brand section is incredibly strong. And people are starting to use their archive as a way forward.
Very interesting, and that I think this is another trend that's been accelerated, but the trend towards brands getting creative inspiration from their heritage is really interesting, isn't it? And there is so much of that now. Yes,
and you're seeing on adverts on television. If you look at, I mean, you watch Vauxhall, for instance, they now all say built in Britain since 1904. Brexit started to change that slightly, because again, your sort of longevity and your trust, if you like, with your customers is your heritage and brand. And some of the bigger, older brands, without a doubt, have that cushion, if you like. But you can't rest on your laurels. You've still got to be able to deliver, you know, a quality product. And we worked with Heinz. Heinz, as you can imagine, have had a good lockdown. A lot of people eating beans, drinking soup. And so they've diverted very much into helping children at schools and moving into meals for schools and looking at how they use their brand going forward. And that, of course, brings a whole host of new adverts and new opportunities, which luckily are sent down the line to us as well. So we have them, you know, we were able to show how the crisis, if you like, has affected marketing. In 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 years' time, educationalists, without a doubt, will be looking to us to provide some of that material. So saving your archive, saving your material is still a huge message from us. And every digital agency is so easy to hit a delete button. Nowadays, if you need more server space, you just clear your servers. Well, we're losing some of the more modern advertising, more modern flavors. So, you know, I would say, wouldn't I? Yeah, send it to us. You use us as your long-term.
Okay, we'll send everything your way, Richard.
We'll send it
overall, I mean, I'm encouraged by all of this because the panel is sounding optimistic. I think generally, which probably 6 months ago we would have been much less so. Richard, you're beginning to talk about some long-term trends in branding, and Simon, you talked a bit about conscious consumption and vegan indulgence. That's my phrase of the day, I think, vegan indulgence. Do you see that this kind of more generally conscious consumption as a thing that's going to grow over the next 10 years?
Who are you asking? Sorry, Robert.
Rich, Simon, sorry.
Oh, okay. Yes, I do. I think the world is changing. I think we're on the cusp. I think we're at that sort of doorway that Arundhati Roy mentioned in her quote, that we are sort of stepping through something into a different era. And one of my view is that one of the characteristics of the new era is that consumers, particularly young consumers, they would even reject the word consumers, but let's say, you know, to use the old terminology, younger consumers in particular will no longer be content with brands that are either, you know, shinier, glossier, more fashionable, or even cheaper. They will be demanding, and we're finding this to our advantage, and also sometimes as a challenge, will be demanding that brands aren't just saying things but doing things, particularly around issues relating to sustainability, to ethical behaviour, to not just of the company itself. So we get challenged on things like, you know, how much of our packaging is recyclable, etc., etc. But we also get challenged and questioned. I mean, we have answers to them about what kind of employment contracts the people picking our cocoa beans in South America are on, those sorts of things. But then there's a sort of bigger version of that is people come to us because they want chocolate and they want ice cream, but for whatever reason, sometimes it's dietary, sometimes it's to do with a conscious view of the world. They choose something that's vegan and organic. And I think the reason veganism has grown so dramatically in the last 24 months, really, it's been the massive rise of it, is because of that changing worldview, where people are realizing that, you know, we can't just have endless consumption like we've had since the 1950s. Something has to change. And so buyers, let's call them that, are seeking out brands now that fulfill certain criteria that go way beyond the product itself. Happily, we are trying very hard to be on the right side of history, and that's you know, we don't do it 100%, but we're trying very hard. And I think they're the brands that are going to grow, the people who consciously place themselves on the right side of history.
Do you see that, Rebecca, just at the level of day-to-day kind of click behaviour?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that I think has happened during this crazy 2020 is that people have more time to do research on the brands that they're buying. And one of the things that we see is that the behaviour of see an ad, click and buy is being augmented with see an ad, click, oh, look into that a bit, and then buy. And I think that's also, I think, because there are a lot of especially on some of the social platforms, there's a lot of unscrupulous advertising going on with people using different brands to point to the same thing. You know, there's a lot more, it's a bit of a wild west on some level in the on the social media platform advertising especially. And I think that that's training people to be a little bit more critical of what they're doing. And I definitely think that that consumer behavior, as you say, which is not accepting the previous norms, not just assuming that, yeah, we can just consume and consume and consume, but actually wanting genuine sustainability, and that anyone who does signal that they are virtuous, that it's not just virtue signaling, they actually go that step beyond and that they have those things in practice. I think it goes hand in hand with a bit of calling out culture that people enjoy as well. I think that aspect of saying, oh, you say you're so ethical, but what about that kind of thing? And really, honestly, I think that a lot of that comes from people having more time online and therefore engaging in some of those conversations more. So I think any brand that is wanting to position themselves as sustainable, ethical, all of those things, really has to walk that walk. It's not just about, you know, I think that greenwashing is harder than ever at the moment because people are doing that research.
Yeah. Claire, what about Aviva? Do these things resonate for you, or are you really much more a price-led business?
I think it's interesting. I guess it's because it's less sort of tangible when people are. So car insurance price is still the main factor around that. I do think, yes, things are starting to change a little bit, but we're still not really seeing that there's a difference between, I think, what people say and what they'll do, and will they put their hands in their pocket. And this is where I think was alluded to before, it's down to different customer segments, isn't it, where and perhaps where you are in terms of your sort of disposable income. If push comes to shove and you haven't got any extra money to pay that extra for it, then it's sort of something that you just can't do. So yeah, for us, price remains still the biggest factor.
And do you see any shift in Aviva towards investing in brand rather than just spending on marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had some sort of changes in in senior management, so so that alludes to something, but who knows what, and I don't know anything. So yeah, there is that. There's always that sort of balance, and I think we've been really lucky that we've got a very strong, recognised, trusted brand. But again, that's changing, isn't it? Consumers are just not bothered by that as much. So yeah, it's definitely something that we need to address.
Great. Okay. So thanks, Claire. Just one final question for you all before we open it up, which is just to think about what we've got here in Norwich, which I think is an unusual combination of brands and agencies and other organisations. Richard, you're in a very good place to observe that. Would you say that Norwich is different, or does every big city have something like this?
Well, I suppose every big city has its agencies, but Norwich, I think, is particularly interesting in the range of development of different agencies and brands. I mean, we have several top 30 regional agencies, so you know, there's several agencies that are, you know, as firing on the guns of the big boys, as it were, in London or Manchester, and I think. Because we're always seen as sort of out in the North Sea and a long distance, as it were, that creates a culture where actually we're very good at what we do, very professional at what we do. We design and deliver some amazing stuff. So I think Norwich has a huge opportunity to punch way above its weight with the quality of inspiration and product that the agencies here can deliver. And they would, of course, be working on global brands, not necessarily just on Norwich brands, but the agencies, I think, have a huge opportunity here to punch above the weight, without a doubt. And I think that if I'm just going back to your previous question, you're finding that the ad agencies are very slow to respond. If you think about it, it's only been 2.5 years roughly. You have seen lots of multicultural in adverts. You've gone from the traditional family to a much more representative family. And I know the Advertising Association and the IPA have just launched Ad Green, which is their response to climate change, and it's taken quite a long time for the industry to grab hold of that and deliver that. The public are way ahead of it, brands are way ahead of it, and it's got a bit of catching up to do. And I think that's a real niche for Norfolk and Suffolk, in that we are at the forefront of some of that climatic delivery and change, the UEA especially. And so the advertising campaigns and the inspiration we can use from here, I think, steals us a march a bit.
That's a really interesting opportunity, Richard. Thank you. So Richard's talking about the agencies here in Norwich. From the agency perspective, Rebecca, how do you feel about it? Do you feel that agencies get together and share things and learn from each other?
So I think there's definitely more opportunities to do so, and I'm hoping that that's maybe part of what we're launching today, or thinking towards. I think the thing that I have noticed in recent years is, whereas in the past we used to have a London footprint office somewhere so that our London clients weren't nervous about hiring an agency that was out in the sticks kind of thing, that's simply not needed anymore. One of the things that we notice is that people that sort of I don't know, regional agency approach seems a lot more accepted in clients who are national, international, all of those things. We're not having to pretend to be sort of Norwich and London kind of thing anymore, which I think a lot of agencies I think had to do before to be taken seriously on a national scale, and I don't think that is needed anymore. I think that we do have a wonderfully unique mix here in Norwich, and I think it's massively down to the UEA and the Arts College and all of the people who come to Norfolk to study interesting creative things and then end up staying because it's so wonderful and so beautiful. And it's interesting, that conversation about, you know, what can we do to make sure that Norfolk is seen as being a place of innovation rather than a backwater. I think that is happening so much at the moment. I think that there is a sense that people have. I feel when I say, hey, I'm here from we're based in Norwich or we're based in Norfolk, I think people are generally responding with, oh God, lucky you, rather than really, why are you based in Norwich? Which I think was definitely the type of question that we get a few years ago.
And I think that's another trend that the crisis will have accelerated, won't it? There's so many people in London are thinking there's no reason to live in London anymore.
Absolutely.
So, and the brand of Norwich itself, therefore, has got a role to play in all of this, clearly. Simon, you know the branding world around here very well indeed. Does it feel special to you?
Yes, it does. I'm rather out of the agency loop. I haven't worked in an agency for a very long time, although I was working on my own account for a while as a consultant. But yeah, I think I have a challenge for agencies, though, which is that I think that if in this new future that we've sort of hinted at, and which I firmly believe is coming or is already here, I think agencies are going to have to add much more than either really effective comms or the generation of content. I became rather disillusioned with the obsession with content generation over the last few years. I think it's sort of moved on a little, but I think agencies have to come up with other things that are going to make them valuable to client companies. And the reason I say that from a position of experience is that actually we don't have an agency at Booja-Booja. Everything we've done and everything we're likely to do for at least the next 18 to 24 months will be done in-house. And that's because, not to say we have all of the necessary skills in depth, but it's partly a budgetary issue, because all companies want to sort of limit their expenditure to things that they really need. But it's also that the things we really need to there is a saying in sort of branding and marketing, which is, you get good and then you get famous, rather than the other way around. It's always dangerous to do it the other way around. We're already good. My job is to try and make us more famous. And I have yet to receive an approach from an agency with a convincing argument as to how they can make us more famous at appealing budget levels, if you see what I mean. So rightly or wrongly, I'm only using us as an example, but rightly or wrongly, we're doing it ourselves. And I think there must be dozens, if not hundreds, of brands across Norfolk, let's say, who would love to work with the creative clout and power. And I don't doubt the creativity of agencies for a second. I used to be the creative director of an agency here. But business owners, I think, need something more persuasive. And one of the participants here, one of the people watching us, Dan Bradfield, asked a question earlier on saying, what are some of the things brands can do to invest in their brand? My answer to that pertains to this question, which is, I think what brands can do to spend on brand is to spend on their behavior, to spend on what they actually do rather than what they say. I think that's where the investment is. And that's the challenge for agencies. How can they contribute to that? I don't have an answer to that, but I think if agencies are going to survive and thrive, I think they're going to have to find a way of answering that question.
And I think that's sorry, there's a noise in the background. That's another challenge, another trend that's been accelerated towards in-house creativity. A lot of the best creative jobs are going to be in-house rather than in agencies, I think, in the future. Claire, finally, how does the Norwich sort of world look to you in Aviva, by far the biggest brand in the city?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, so we're definitely on that trend of in-house creative and using Norwich talent as well, which is great. So I've been at Aviva for 12 years, which I can't quite believe, and much like a lot of other people, which again, there's a very long tenure of people staying at Aviva. You join because it's that local company that normally has a job going somewhere, and then you sort of love it and you stay, and I think this is great for Norwich. There's such a variety of skill and talent and jobs, and I think particularly with insurance, obviously you've got Marsh as another really big insurer in Norwich, and you've got some really big brokers as well. So there's a good kind of insurance hub within Norwich, good variety of skills. Like I said, we now we've bought our HTML coders and designers in-house, so they're closer with our teams. That's worked really well. But then there also is a role for agencies, but this is where I think sort of been a global organisation. A lot of our contracts, we look for global contracts, so agencies that can obviously cover that, and that might be a challenge for perhaps smaller Norwich agencies to tackle. But yeah, I mean, I think what also Norwich offers is a really great work-life balance. Like, compared to some of my London work colleagues, they're always very jealous that I'm leaving the office. It's a 20-minute walk home, and and then I'm home. No nasty commute or anything. So yeah, I've definitely fly the Norwich flag as a born and bred Norwich lady.
Great, Claire, thank you. So there's two challenges there. One is to meet Simon's need to be famous at the right price. And the other is to meet Aviva's need to do things at a global scale. So who knows, big possibilities there. I'm going to open things up to everybody now. And a couple of questions have come in already on the chat. So let me bounce one of those off, perhaps all of you. Dan is asking, when you say invest in brand versus spending on marketing, what are some of the things that brands can do or companies can do to invest in their brand? Simon, I think you've hinted at this because it's about the doing rather than the saying.
Yes, exactly. In fact, it was Dan's question that I mentioned earlier. It's a really, really good question. There has to be a balance, and we do spend time and resource and some money on marketing stuff, undoubtedly. But I think the most important thing for brand, if I was starting a brand afresh, and I have started a couple, is to spend the resource on being absolutely clear about what the brand stands for and doing things to demonstrate that. So it's not just what you say, it has to be what you do, whether that's what you make, how you make it, what service you provide, how you provide it, what your ethical, sustainable policies are. That's where I think the focus is. It used to be on, let's spend tens of thousands of pounds on a gorgeous new logo. I think logos, frankly, are pretty irrelevant now. They're a nice badge to have, but I've got the Booja-Booja logo behind me. You know, it's nice, but it doesn't have to be that. There could be anything. It could be written in Courier, black on white. It wouldn't make any difference to our brand. Our brand is about what we do, and I think that's where people need to focus.
Okay, Rebecca, you just have launched a new logo, but I'm guessing that that's a signal of other things going on inside the business. Yeah,
so our new visual identity, I think, reflects our brand better than our old visual identity did. And for us, that was it was important for us to move forward from where we were. We had some feedback about a year ago with someone saying, you know, in order to get to that next stage of Fountain's journey and the level of client that we're now working with, the level of international campaigns that we're taking on, they said, oh, the problem with your brand is that it really just reflects the size of business that you are now. And I remember thinking, well, that's amazing, because it was made 5 years ago when there were 10 of us instead of 42. And like the fact that it actually has, that our old brand identity did see us through to where we were was a remarkable success of it. But for us, targeting a different type of client, working with a different type of company, and being seen much more in a consultative space as well as a service delivery space. So we have the in-house team at Fountain delivering services. We also are offering a lot more consultancy and strategy. So our new visual identity aims to reflect that. But as I say, the visual identity is not the brand. The visual identity is part of our brand and is an exciting part because it's so external. But it reflects many of the things that make us who we are as a business and as a place to work. And I'm incredibly passionate about that aspect of things, of, you know, making sure that we are not just saying we are X, we are Y, but actually that we live it and that our team really experience that as well.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. There's a question from Penny. The challenge is whether Norwich agencies can now command London-sized fees. Claire, would that? I'm guessing that wouldn't be a problem if the Norwich agency is delivering global results for you, then London-sized fees wouldn't be a problem.
No, I'm not sure what do you mean by London-sized fees, as in costs?
I think that just the perception that an agency in London is going to be more expensive than an agency in Norwich.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking to save money, so I think it's there's sort of key criteria that sometimes when you're looking for an agency that there needs to fit, obviously with whatever the scope of the contract is, and whether that's globally, obviously making sure they've got the right skills, and then everything comes in at the right cost. So I mean, we worked for a very long time with an agency which were based up in York, and it was brilliant going to see them. They were not even in the centre of York, they were in the country, and it was lovely out there. So I don't think location comes into like the deciding factor, as long as they hit the criteria, and yeah, better cost the better.
Sure, okay, and of course a Norwich agency can probably afford to charge a little bit less, but charging too little devalues what you do, doesn't it? So we have a question coming in about a sole trader from Jenny. What would you recommend to a sole trader regarding branding and getting recognised? Richard, can we kick off with you, please, on that one? Someone who's just starting up, perhaps on their own.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for me because I don't build brands, as it were. I archive them. But I would say look at history. Go and look at what others have done. Because there are, there's in some respects there's nothing ever new. We're recycling a lot, but there are some brilliant stuff that you can do and look to see how it fits with what you're trying to sell and do. I agree with Simon. I think it's very much about what your brand is and what you want from your brand. And people are spending more time, I think, reflecting on what you stand for as much as how you look and go for it.
I mean, what would you? I know you've done a lot of work on personal branding as well at the level of individual people. What would be and you've written a book about this, if not several. What would be? Where would you start with a sole trader?
Can you remind me of the question? I was just answering a question online from somebody.
What would you recommend to a sole trader regarding branding and getting recognised?
Oh, okay. Well. I think the principles are the same for a sole trader as they are for any larger brand. I think you have to be something authentic. So whatever you're selling or trading or offering as a service, it has to be something that you are expert in, or it is of great quality in whatever form. So it has to be authentic. You have to somehow make a compelling offer. You have to appeal to people's emotions as much as their intellect, because I don't believe that people really buy with their sort of rational side of their brains. They buy anything, whether it's a product or a service, with the emotional side. So you have to sort of somehow make an emotional impact on people. That might just be because you're a nice person, but somehow you have to demonstrate that. You also have, and this plays to a couple of other questions that people are challenging me on here, about you do have to be distinctive. Just to clarify my point earlier on about our logo could be written in Korea, I was really only trying to indicate that I don't think you start with a logo. I think you start with the meaning, and the logo sort of should follow from that. I don't want to go down as someone who doesn't think design matters, because clearly it does. But I think above all, the sole trader or the large company has to create meaning. That's my definition of brand. And so people have to know what you mean. What is it? What are they getting from you? How are you going to make them feel? And whatever it is, a service or a product. And it doesn't need to cost money, frankly, to do that. It can be with something you do. And I'm happy to expand on that.
It's almost a little bit of of introspection in terms of who you are and what you want to stand for, in a way, and why you set up the business in the first place.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I think sometimes you have to go a little bit beyond your comfort zone. So when I started out as a consultant, leaving an agency in 2005, I did all kinds of things with which I wasn't comfortable at all. I managed to I had opinions about things, and I'm not an extrovert at all. I'm very introverted, actually, but I managed to get myself on telly by just simply having opinions, most of which I've long since forgotten what they were, but that wasn't the point. By having opinions and therefore getting on things like Newsnight, I won clients. Now, that was from the perspective as a brand consultant, but I was way out of my depth. And I think sometimes as a sole trader, particularly if you're starting out, you have to be willing to go out of your depth in order to be compelling.
Great. Okay, so that's a nice. If it feels comfortable, then you're not doing enough to build a brand, probably.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, so, great brand, slightly uncomfortable. I think that's entirely right, Rob. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I've noticed, and we were talking with my students about this yesterday, is how many organisations are currently building brands that are just very much the same as their competitors, and then absolutely staying in the comfort zone. And I could see why in uncertain times there's a certain security in that. But for me, it isn't great brand building. It's not really about the future. Now I'm just having a look in the chat for more questions. What else has come in on the chat? Any more questions for our panel? Okay, there's a couple more things coming up. Okay, so Nigel is asking, is the brand for Norwich meaningful, and if so, what is it? What is it that Norwich stands for? Claire, what do you think?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think there's a lot of, well, certainly from Aviva's point of view, there's a lot of loyalty in Norwich. It'll be interesting to see how much this changes in the future, but obviously historically there hasn't always been the range of choice of jobs that there would be in London. So in London you might move companies every couple of years. So within Aviva, I've been really lucky, and I've probably moved around different marketing and sort of marketing associated sort of teams every couple of years. We're a big fan of change and restructuring. So I've definitely had a lot of variety within Aviva, but I think this is where from Norwich, and it's a balance, isn't it? So you've got the loyalty, you've got people who've been there, but then you also need to sort of keep things fresh. So I think as long as you've got the right sort of attitude, I think that's what Norwich I think can offer now. Be really interesting to see what if that changes in the future.
I think, Rebecca, you're saying that people are seeing Norwich as a place of innovation already, actually.
That's our experience. I don't feel. It's funny. I often hear people saying, "Oh, we need to rebrand Norwich, or we need to reproject a different image of Norwich." And I feel like that's a bit outdated now, and that might just be our experience of sort of growing from being a small Norwich agency to a larger Norwich agency and having clients further afield. It might be sort of. There's part of me that feels like the more that we talk about how can we rebrand Norwich, the more we put focus on something that isn't really as much of a challenge anymore. I feel like Norwich has so much to offer, and I sometimes almost want to say, let's not broadcast it too far and wide, because it's so lovely here. We don't want too many people moving up here, kind of situation. But I definitely think that everything to do with remote working, like there is such a huge change coming after the storm of the actual pandemic has passed. There will be a completely new, sorry, I hate the phrase new normal. There'll be a next normal, a different version of the way that things work. And I think that how people see different cities is going to change based on quality of life here, rather than based on those sort of perceptions. And as you know, you were saying, living in Norwich means not having to commute. Living in Norwich means a 10-minute walk and you're in the countryside, all of those things that actually the pandemic has shown how much more important those things are. And I hope that we can get to a point where we don't need to talk about rebranding Norwich, because the version that is out there, that, and I think a lot of I remember when I was a student at UEA, I remember being told that Norwich had one of the highest retention rates of students that just didn't leave after they studied. And if that's the way that we grow, that we have amazing, bright young things coming to study here and then saying, hey, I'm going to stay, which is exactly what I did, then I feel like that in itself offers a hugely bright future for this.
It's a really interesting point, because most regional cities have the opposite problem, that their students disappear as soon as they finish their courses, and that's something that is very distinctive, I think, about Norwich.
I echo that. Certainly within my team, there's lots of people, who came here because of the UEA and stayed. I think when people do come here, they fall in love with it.
I think that's right, and maybe in some ways the only thing that's wrong with Norwich is that we're sometimes too self-deprecating, and there's an attractive modesty, but sometimes maybe goes too far. Just whizzing along the chat, there's a couple of agencies in this webinar who have obviously got services really relevant to what we're talking about, SafePoint and Thrive. So I'm hoping people are making contacts and networking. But there was a question about a point you made, Rebecca, about, I think, was it or Simon, about consumers being interested in employment contracts and really weird things like that inside the companies that they buy from. Is that becoming mainstream, or is that still a pretty much minority interest, that scrutiny of what goes on inside companies?
Well, my view on, just very briefly, what I meant there, I wasn't talking about the employment contracts of people who actually work here in our factory and offices in Brook, just south of Norwich. What the interest is in, because we import ingredients, so we import cocoa, we import nuts, we import agave syrup, all of those kinds of things, and some of our buyers of our chocolates and our ice creams are very interested, more interested than you'd imagine. It's probably still a minority, but they're very interested in the working conditions of the people thousands of miles away. And I'll give you a good example. It's a sort of amusing example, but then again, it isn't. There are some people use monkeys to climb palm trees or whatever the tree is to get cocoa beans. Monkeys are very good at bringing cocoa beans, but they're treated very badly. It's very unethical. And we don't buy our cocoa beans from anybody that uses monkeys. There are other much more sort of better ways of getting the cocoa beans down from the tree than having monkeys run up and down them. But people actually, I didn't even know that was a thing until customers began to ask us. So, you're not part of you're not one of those brands that uses monkeys to run up and down trees, are you? And of course we're not. We looked into it and we're not. And people are genuinely interested. They want to know when they put a chocolate truffle in their mouth from us, they want to know that it's vegan, that it's organic, that it's gluten-free, and they want to know that it's ethically produced. And that's a big change. When people bite into, let's say, a popular mainstream corporately produced bar of chocolate, I don't think they have the same questions. And maybe it's to do with our positioning. Because we've positioned ourselves with a certain stance, people poke at it, understandably, and ask us to prove it. And I think that's a strength rather than a weakness. So we see that as because we can answer the question and tell the story. It gives us an opportunity to tell a story.
Yes. If you stand for something, you will be held accountable for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
what I mean. You can't claim to stand for something and then suddenly let someone find out that you're not. Then you're in real trouble. Yeah.
Claire, do you find that your customers are interested in the ethics inside Aviva, or is that not a high concern in insurance?
It's not something I'm aware of. I'm not. Yeah, it's not something that has come up. I was trying to sort of think how people sort of perceive it from their sort of insurance, where it's a very intangible sort of product, isn't it? And that they, and even sort of all the claims and the underwriting is all done in a deep dark cave. So I think that's quite probably something that we need to look into. But from a recruitment point of view, from a sort of a staff well-being, this is where Aviva have really put a lot of focus and a lot of effort. So in some of their policies around sort of like equal maternity and paternity cover as well, I think. So even men get 6 months full pay paternity for when they have a child, which is pretty impressive. And through lockdown as well, obviously when parents when schools were closed and parents had to then turn to home, the message from the CEO and down was very much like, look, concentrate on yourself, put your family first, have conversations with your manager about how and when you can fit work in, but if you can't work, you can't work. Like nobody expects this situation. So it's very much about focusing on customers and focusing on our staff, because happy staff, happy customers, hopefully.
Indeed, and I'm sure that's true. So I'm just having a look down the chat, and there's lots of very exciting comments here. I'm not sure there's any more questions coming. If you've got a question for the panel, please do type it in now. I'm intrigued by Paul, who currently lives in Cambridge but had lived in Norwich for 20 years. But you're thinking of moving back. So Paul, tell us why, if you have a moment on the chat. I'd be interested to hear why. Sarah is asking. Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, while you're finding a question, I was going to say that what we're finding in the archives and the companies that we archive for, ethics are becoming increasingly important. And I think with the political debate that's going on with, with the dreaded word Brexit and, chlorinated chicken and all these sorts of things, actually people are becoming slightly more aware. And I think the close down, the lockdown has made people more internet savvy, and they're searching, they're spending time looking and finding. And I think that some of the brands that are reacting to that are making headway. People are very worried about where stuff comes from. Whether that actually stops them spending at the end of the day is yet to be seen, but it will do eventually, because I think that once you get to you only need one major horse meat scandal again, and people's shift quite quickly. So I think your ethics in a brand is incredibly important.
Yeah, good. Well, that's a theme that's come through over and over again, I think, in this conversation, intertwined with an interesting discussion about Norwich as a city and Norwich as a brand as well. I'm going to ask just one final question and then try and sum up. And Rebecca, I think you talked about this. You talked about Arundhati Roy's portal, or the door that we may be going through. What do you see on the other side of that portal, both for branding as a whole and for Norwich, branding in Norwich in particular? Big question, but it's an exciting image, and just interested to know what people see on the other side.
One of the things that I've been seeing a lot of recently are brands that are creating communities around them, and I think that they've done very well in during the pandemic, where community has been under pressure in a certain kind of way, and I hope that certain aspects of that can be carried on into the way that the 2021 and beyond work, is that things that are supportive to communities, so are reflecting the values that communities have, supporting local suppliers, that kind of thing, but also that are one of the brands that I've been following a lot recently, because I've essentially drunk their Kool-Aid and a huge fan of, is Peloton, and their whole brand, which is around fitness and all those things, but it is also hugely about community, and it is about people doing things together. It's not just about having an exercise bike that you ride on your own, it's about sort of all of these other aspects, and it's bringing technology into that. And I think that a lot of other brands can do something very similar to that as well, where it doesn't necessarily need to rely on that technology. It's that people are searching at the moment to be part of something, and especially part of something positive.
I think that's a very exciting thought. And again, it's something that's accelerated is the renewed interest in community. We've all got a lot more interested in our neighbourhoods, I think, because of the lockdown. And one of the things that we often talk to our clients about at the moment, which I think is a really interesting thought, is instead of thinking about what is it that you do for your consumers, think about what it is that you and your consumers can do together. And it's just a very different way that's a community thought, and it's a very different way of thinking about the function of the business in a way.
And I think in terms of marketing, it feeds into that whole user-generated content aspect of things, where suddenly you're not having to work as hard at marketing because the community that you're building is doing all of that for you. Which, you know, in its tackiest versions is like competitions, take a picture of yourself with our product and kind of thing. But actually, when it is genuinely driven by the users, and when the investment in a brand's story and community involves that sort of approach of bringing people along with them, I think it can be incredibly effective. And equally, I don't think every brand could do that. Like, I'm not sure that toilet bleach brands could necessarily create a community of people who clean the toilet in the same kind of way. It is sort of niched into different areas, but I think that there is a big opportunity for a lot of brands to think about how they can engage these communities that are, I mean, I think people are thirsty for it. I think there's an element of people wanting to be part of different things, whether that's you know, because they're starting university and not having the same experience that their older siblings had, or whether it's, you know, whatever it is that people are feeling is different at the moment. I think that sense of belonging can be met in ethical ways as well with those brands.
Fantastic, thank you. Richard, you see obviously very clearly back into the past. What do you see looking forward through the portal? What would you like to see on the other side?
Well, I think I agree with Rebecca completely. I do think the quality of life and community is increasingly what people are looking for, and the brand of Norfolk and Norwich has been increasingly that. And I think that our reputation in delivering high quality and individuality is what politicians can use to rebrand. So in some respects, I'd leave it to them to try and brand, but you have to feed them to be able to get that brand going forward. I think history will show that companies that are looking to their past to inspire their future still works, and that sort of building on that reputation and that quality, I think going forward is incredibly important. And I think that we have it in spades in this part of the world with the amazing quality of life, and it's bringing that quality of life, if you like, into your brand is important.
Okay, so in a way, what you see is it's kind of authenticity, really, in a way, isn't it? In brands that are rooted in their heritage and in the place that they come from.
Yes, absolutely. I think that your heritage, wherever you are, is incredibly important in selling what you are and what you stand for. And you can't falsify that. People see through that quite quickly. And I think the people that have that ability to understand their heritage going forward gives them a strength that you know, in the marketplace people soon see.
So what you stand for is at least partly determined by where you come from, in a way.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Interesting. Claire, what do you see through the portal?
Yeah, so well, our purpose is around, our sort of strapline is around sort of with you today for a better tomorrow, which is, yeah, probably really relevant at the minute, particularly from a sort of a general insurance point of view. Customer needs are changing, aren't they? You aren't driving as much. If you had 2 cars, 3 cars, you might be looking to reduce your cars. You're spending more time at home. So I think for us, some of our products around that haven't changed a great deal for a long time now need to change. We need to we need to understand what is now important to customers, how things have changed, and we also need to be looking to the future of how this sort of normal is going to settle down and how that's going to be. So yeah, I think that's sort of that's where we are. It's you very much buy insurance often to for reassurance, don't you? And to forget about it, to know that it's there when you need it, and that's very much the role that we need to play, and just adapt with what we've seen happen in this crazy year.
Okay, so in a way, all of this just increases people's need for reassurance, and that plays to you. The question mark is: will in the long term, will we actually have fewer possessions to insure? In a way, will we share more possessions and so on? And that becomes more complicated, obviously, for insuring.
Yeah, we're potentially rethinking cover that we've never thought about before. So insuring all your work equipment at home, which right. You are covered for. You might be looking at outbuildings and stuff. You want to make sure that all of that stuff is covered. So we need to make sure that we move with the times with our products.
Great, interesting, very interesting. Simon, what's through the portal for you? Simon, I think you may be on mute.
Sorry, I was just saying I think there might be a difference between what I would like to be through the portal and what may well be there. The comments earlier about the creation of a community, brands creating communities and things. I don't want to be deliberately controversial. I don't really buy that idea. I don't think that people are very motivated by wanting to be a brand named community. I think people aren't going to march in the street for Booja-Booja. Brands are much better advised in a way to think about what people actually care about and to try and somehow contribute to that. What I would like to see through the portal, and I think more and more wise brands are doing it, is to go beyond even the four things I talked. I've been in my books. I've talked about 4 pillars of branding: being authentic, being compelling, being distinctive, and sort of striving towards excellence. But actually, I think there's a 5th thing now, which is to, in some way, contribute to society, to the planet, to people, to community. And so, rather than creating artificial communities around the brand, I think personally, I think brands would be well advised to try and make a contribution in some way. I don't know if that's always easy, but in America, there's the B Corp movement, which has come over here, where the B standing for beneficial, which is much the same thing. I use the word contributive, they use the word beneficial, but more and more companies are getting switched onto that. And oddly enough, we get questioned about that too. We've been asked by some wholesalers before they buy from us, because we sell to wholesalers, are you a B Corp company? And we're not yet. It's an ambition of mine that we do become one over the next couple of years. And being a B Corp company is all about the contribution you make back to society. It goes way beyond conventions of branding or advertising or marketing. So I think that's what I like to see on the other side, that brands realize that actually people don't care about them at all, and nor should they. And that the brands need to demonstrate that they care. The sort of reverse, if you like, of what our expectations have been to date.
Great, okay. So I think if I just try and sum up, we're coming to the end of the webinar. What I'm hearing is that not only in Norwich, and by the way, around Norwich, a lot of people have made the point that a lot of things go on in villages outside the city too, and we should include all of that. That what's interesting is not just the number of big brands and the number of great agencies and things like the history of advertising trust, but also an attitude. And I think there's a very clear attitude that's coming across from the panel and from what's being said on the chat, to do with the ways in which brands should contribute as well as taking, to do with the particular expertise in a lot of green issues that we have in the region, to do with the reassurance, the rootedness that comes from a belief in a place, and an interest in heritage and drawing things from that heritage, as well as the reassurance that comes from having lots of very reassuring insurance companies in the city, and a belief in small or big ways in community. And for me, that's really exciting, that we're not just telling a story of Norwich as a place that happens to have a lot of things going on, but Norwich is a place that actually itself stands for something when it comes to branding. And potentially, I think that's a fantastic story to tell, that we could use to bring more people here, to encourage those who are here to stay, although I think a lot of people do want to stay anyway, and start to build something that is a kind of cluster where the whole adds up to more than the sum of the parts. So I'm very encouraged by this conversation. We will we'll get back in touch with everyone who's signed up for this and find out how you would like to be involved in the future. We will get a group together to get things moving, and maybe start to think about events for the end of this year and for the start of next year. Dan is summing up nicely by saying, stand for something good and tell that story well, a firm foundation. And I think that's the firm foundation that we've constructed today. So a huge thank you to everyone, the 40 or so people who've joined us, to Jessica and Julia, who behind the scenes have managed all of this, to my colleagues at UEA who got behind all of this and got it off the ground, James in particular on the call, and to our panelists, to Claire and to Rebecca and to Richard and to Simon, who provided so much food even before we've had lunch. Intellectual food. I think we can now all go off and have some actual food, and maybe some ice cream afterwards, Simon, for pudding. A huge thank you very much to all of you. This is not the end, this is the beginning of something, and it's great to have been together with you at the start. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.